Hey, everybody, what's up? Hope you're having a good day. Hope you're enjoying lying season in the NFL. My name is Trey Wingo, Chief NFL Analyst for Pro Football Network, among many other things that I do here. Glad you're with us tonight for the first of our Draft Insiders show on Pro Football Network. We are streaming live on a variety of platforms, including my Twitter feed at Wingos, if you want to jump in there as well. Hope all is well with you. We are into free agency, and we are steamrolling towards the NFL draft, which, of course, is going to be in Vegas this year, 2 years removed from when it was supposed to be there in 2020. But, you know, that COVID thing hit, and we had the virtual draft, and we've sort of been adjusting ever since. So glad you're with us. We got a lot to talk about. We got so many things we're going to get through. But before we get started tonight, NFL draft fans, it is now our chance for you to be the smartest football fans in the room with the Pro Football Network 2022 NFL Draft Guide. Go to profootballnetwork.com/NFL Draft Guide, and inside you'll find a fully interactive experience to get you ready for the moment your favorite team makes their selection on draft night. Here's what you're going to find. You get behind-the-scenes looks into Pro Football Network scouting process. Draft Director Cam Mellor and Chief Draft Analyst Tony Pauline, along with Ollie Hodgkinson and Ian Cummings, share with you the secrets behind their over 750-plus in-depth scouting profiles. They went very, very deep. More than that, insiders or exclusive videos with many of the top prospects of the draft. Hear directly from them why they think they can make it in the NFL and why they think she'll be drafted even higher than a lot of teams think they should be drafted. To kick things off tonight and to kick things off in the guide, I share with you the stories of my favorite memories from over 20 years of covering the NFL draft, from the days at Radio City Music Hall with Ace, What, Boom was there as well, plus the traveling pageantry that it has now become, and it's going to be incredible in Las Vegas this year. There's no event really like the NFL draft. I always call it the ultimate reality TV show, because if you do a reality TV show, everyone knows where the cameras are and they know they sort of play to it. None of us have any idea what's going to actually happen on draft night, and that's what makes it true reality television. You'll feel like in your favorite team's draft room. So get all set, get to go. Go to profootballnetwork.com/NFL Draft Guide, because now you are on the clock. So we've got a lot to discuss with you tonight. Glad you're with us. Let's bring in our chief draft analyst, Tony Pauline, as we get set to go. Tony, good to see you again, my friend. How are you?
I'm okay, Trey. I've been counting down the minutes to our reunion here. I enjoyed the shows last year. I'm looking forward to this year. I'm sure we'll have a lot of good news, which will either come true a month after the draft or a year after.
I was about to say, that's the beauty of it, right? We have no idea on draft night whether it's going to be the right pick. 5 years from now, we'll find out whether or not it's going to be the draft. But that's what makes it fun, right? The draft is the ultimate experience and the ultimate experiment, because we're never really sure how any of this is going to work out.
And people go crazy about it at the end of the draft. Oh, my team did incredibly well. My team was garbage, and it's all named on a piece of paper. So, but yeah, we'll fill in the blanks up until that point.
All right. So before we get heavy into the draft, and we're going to start, by the way, with the most important position in football. We've got a lot of quarterback news and a quarterback draft prospects that we need to talk about, and we'll get there. But obviously, Tony, we're in the throes of free agency in the NFL, and it's been absolutely nuts with so many of the quarterback moves that have been made and some that are still pending. So let's get right to this right now. Let's start first and foremost with Jacksonville, right? They locked down their franchise quarterback, they believe, last year in the draft in Trevor Lawrence, #1 overall. And I thought they've done a really nice job sort of building around him right now. You saw Brandon Scherf going there. You also saw Zay Jones and some of the other weapons that the Jaguars have given him already, him being, of course, Trevor Lawrence. What do you make of how the Jaguars have sort of stacked their roster around what they believe to be their franchise quarterback in Trevor Lawrence?
I think they gave him the most important weapon, Doug Peterson, a well-known, a winning coach, a guy who's done a great job developing quarterbacks. He's got a history at the position, a guy who will change the culture in that entire organization, which is desperately needed after all the mayhem from last season. I think they've done a good job. I think one of the interesting things is the fact that they decided to franchise their left tackle, Cam Robinson. Yeah. I think it's interesting because all these mock drafts had the Jaguars taking Evan Neal from Alabama with the first pick, or Aquanu. And I've stated all along, none of these top tackles are pure left tackles. None of these guys are surefire, can't miss left tackles. And any of those guys would be a reach with the first pick of the draft. They're not the best players in the draft. I think that the Jaguars affirm that belief by by tagging Cam Robinson again, because he's going to be their left tackle, it gives them some freedom. I mean, they could go offensive tackle and put either Evan Neal or Aquano on the right side. I don't think they're going to do that. I think they're going to go with one of the best players in the draft, most likely Aiden Hutchinson, maybe Kayvon Thibodeau. But, I think they set themselves up well, not only bringing in weapons, but also securing the left side rather than taking a risk with that first pick.
Well, that's interesting, right? Because I think what we've seen over the last couple of years is the idea of a lockdown left tackle and protecting your quarterback's blind side. While it's still important, we see so many defensive ends and sometimes defensive tackles like Aaron Donald, who's a freak show of all freak shows, by the way, move up and down the line. So what you're saying is accurate with Cam, but wouldn't it perhaps be in their best interest to even think about getting like Aquanu, or you said Evan Neal, and then you have lockdown tackles on both sides of the ball, and then you're protected no matter where that best pass rusher lines up on either side against him?
Potentially, but the fact is this is a very rich offensive tackle draft class. I mean, you're going to be able to get good offensive tackles in the top of round 2. So if they don't take Aquanu or Evan Neal at the top of round 1, maybe a Tyler Smith of Tulsa, who's moving up draft boards, is available to them at the top of round 2. He'd be an exceptional pick. There are a lot of other guys, Nicholas Petit-Frere of Ohio State, Rasheed Walker of Penn State. They will be able to get good tackles at the top of round 2 and basically develop that guy, move that guy into a starting lineup.
All right, we'll get into the Aiden Hutchinson discussion in a minute because it is interesting, especially when you saw him struggle against Georgia in the semifinals of the college football playoff. We'll get to that in a minute, but let's talk about some of the other moves. And one of the really interesting moves that has been made is the idea of the wide receiver Christian Kirk coming over from Arizona. And everyone's freaking out about the contract. And he always gets $72 million, potentially $84 million. Let's call cards on the table here, right? We all know what that deal is, and more importantly, what it isn't. That's a 2-year deal for $37 million guaranteed. And let's be clear, that's a great deal for Christian Kirk based on his production coming out of Texas A&M and going to Arizona when they drafted him. But it's not what it's made out to be. And I think we need to be really careful and very specific in how we talk about these contracts that are done, because the agents will always want to get the total potential max dollars of the deal out there. But in reality, that's not what's going to happen. Most of these deals are 2-year deals, and then we'll see, right? So if you're looking at the Christian Kirk deal, don't look at the 72, potentially max $84 million. The bottom line is always the bottom line. It's a 2-year, $37 million deal, and then we'll see.
And the fact is this, he upgrades the position. He is a Doug Peterson type of receiver. He's a guy who can separate through his routes. He's a consistent pass catcher. And he's a desperately needed target for Trevor Lawrence. Listen, you're absolutely right. We saw it a year ago with Kenny Golladay. Sometimes these receivers bring in huge contracts. When you whittle it down, it's not as big as they initially seem, but they always seem to get a lot of money. And why not? I mean, as you pointed out time and time again, this is a passing league. You need the quarterback, but you also need the guy to throw the ball to and catch it on the other end. Yeah,
exactly. And the other thing about this is sort of how many weapons they're going to give him, right? Like we also saw the Zay Jones deal. It seems like, and Evan Ingram also as well coming in. It seems like, Tony, they're trying, it's like, for lack of a better term, it's Sam's Club or Walmart. Better playing by volume. They're just trying to give him as many options as possible to make Trevor feel a little more comfortable.
And why not? Because you get some experienced guys, and then you draft players. You select players in the draft that you can develop. I mean, the Evan Ingram deal was 1 year. This is also a draft that is rich in tight ends, starting in the top part of round 2 through the 3rd round, through the 4th round. So very good chance they take Evan Neal for a year. They draft a guy like Dulcich out of UCLA, maybe Isaiah Likely out of Coastal Carolina. Definitely Zach Ertz type of tight ends that can get down the field, that, type of tight ends that Peterson had so much success with at Philadelphia. So, why not sign a guy like an Ingram to 1 year, and then you select a guy in the draft to develop him? Got to say, in my opinion, the biggest losers in that whole Evan Ingram deal were the New York Giants, because there were teams the past 2 seasons who were pining to give the Giants picks for Evan Ingram, day 2 picks. And when Gettleman was there, he said, no, this is one of our premier players. never lived up to expectations, and now the Giants basically lost them for whatever compensation pick they get in 2023.
How significant do you think the Brandon Scherff signing is? Obviously, this is a guy who's been a workhorse ever since he was drafted by Washington. And you mentioned they franchised Cam Robinson. So, again, I think what we're seeing from the Jags after a disastrous 2021 with the whole Urban Meyer situation, which we can get into, but it was just from start to finish when he signed Tim Tebow to a contract and tried to bring in Chris Doyle as a strength coach from Iowa and said, well, I know this guy. It doesn't matter what you know. It matters what the players think in the locker room. And he never quite understood that in making the transition from the college game to the NFL game. The Scherff signing, I think, is significant because they don't want to see their franchise and Trevor Lawrence go through what, quite frankly, Joe Burrow did this year. Even though they made it to the Super Bowl in Cincinnati, he was sacked 70 times in the regular and postseason. The only two quarterbacks that were sacked more over a one-year time frame, obviously David Carr, when he was the first overall pick by the Texans in 2002, he was sacked 76 times. And then Randall Cunningham, one of the most mobile quarterbacks of all time, was also sacked 72 times. It certainly seems like, if nothing else, you have to respect the idea of what the Jaguars front office is doing in terms of finding a way to protect their franchise.
And that's in its totality. You bring in a good player on the offensive line, but you also bring a player that's a leader in the locker room, a leader in the clubhouse, a guy who will help, basically get that offensive line together. Again, like Peterson, I think Brandon Scherff helps with the culture change that Jacksonville so desperately wants and needs. So I thought they got a 2-for-1 with Scherff, top interior offensive lineman in free agency, a guy who's always been very consistent, and a real leader that will help the offensive line and help calm Trevor Lawrence. So it was a knockout signing for them.
The front office is still in flux, though, right? Like, we're not sure what the future is with Baalke as the GM of the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Trent Baalke is like the cat that's got 90 lives.
Not 9, but 90.
When you think he's done, he somehow survives. And there are a lot of people out there who really don't like Trent Baalke. I mean, that was a sticking point with the whole coaching search. But they ended up with the right guy. We'll see if Peterson can coexist with them. And it'll be interesting, how much input Peterson has in the draft and how much Trent Baalke is maybe able to step back from his own opinions, from his own beliefs of players, and give leeway to Doug Peterson to bring in to select the players that he wants.
And then there's the issue of Laviska Shenault with the Jaguars, who looks like he may be on the trade block. What are your thoughts on where Laviska may be going and his value?
Well, as far as where he's going to go, I mean, there are still some teams out there that need a receiver. I think it's probably going to be a situation where it's a conditional pick. Maybe it's an early day 3 pick. Depending on playing time, depending on production, he could go. The pick could move into the late part of day 2. I mean, he was a guy who had a lot of upside at one time. That had a bright future. Hasn't seemed to pan out for him.
All right, so we'll see what happens with Jacksonville. Obviously, by the way, they just got rid of the last member of that defense in the 2017 AFC Championship game. That again went into Foxborough with Blake Bortles as their quarterback, and had a 10-point lead in the fourth quarter of the AFC Championship game against the Patriots, and just couldn't close the deal. Myles Jack was let go a big part of that game because there was the inadvertent whistle. They said he was down. He wasn't down. What might have been a game-clinching play on that interception. But Myles Jack is the last member of that defense that was so stacked that really brought the Jacksonville Jaguars to the precipice of the Super Bowl. He is now gone. Let's move on to another team and talk about the New York Jets. Big moves here. They get Laken Tomlinson. They get Jordan Whitehair. What are you thinking of what the Jets have done so far under Joe Douglas, the general manager?
They also got the tight end, CJ Uzomah. And
yes, exactly.
It's a desperate need for them. So I think what he's doing is he's setting it up for a defensive draft. You brought in a lot of offensive players. Uzomah, the tight end. You mentioned Laken Tomlinson, who's going to be an immediate starter because they got holes all over that offensive line, or they don't have any consistency at the offensive line. I know the Jet fans are freaking out when I said they have holes over it. They need guys that can help that offensive line mesh. Last year, the first 3 picks, Zach Wilson, Elijah Vera Tucker, Elijah Moore, even Michael Carter, the running back, all offensive players. So I think this is setting up for the Jets to go defense early and often in the draft. pass rusher with one of those first 2 picks, probably cornerback with one of those first 2 picks, although they did sign a corner today in DJ Reed. I believe he's more of a nickel than a starter.
Correct.
Safety at some point in time, maybe in the second round. I don't know that they're going to take Kyle Hamilton with that 4th pick. But again, I think they did a good job filling needs in free agency with good players, and they set themselves up to go defense early in the draft, and the early portion of the draft is stacked with very good defensive players.
It absolutely is. And with the Jets, though, it comes down to one thing, right? Like you talked about it earlier. This is a quarterback-driven league. Do we believe Zach Wilson can be the quarterback they believe him to be when they took him so early in last year's draft?
I think it also comes down to coaching, which will, determine what Zach Wilson does. I mean, Zach Wilson played poorly last year. He had some moments, but overall, you can't be happy with the way Zach Wilson played last year. You got to help him develop, and the defense has to show up, because as bad as Zach Wilson was at times, that defense under Robert Saleh was getting run over on a lot. So it's basically, I think it was a team-wide failure throughout the season. So I agree. Zach Wilson's got to take the next step up. I think Joe Douglas's future with the Jets is tied to Zach Wilson, but the coaching, especially on defense, is also really got to improve.
Listen, when you at points in the season last year, you were thinking maybe Mike White's a better quarterback. That's a problem when you drafted Zach Wilson as high as you drafted. It's taking nothing away from Mike White. I love the way he played. I love some of the gutty things and performances he did. But Mike White is not your future. Zach Wilson has to be. And, I always love it. And I'm sure you appreciate this as long as you've been doing this. When, a team says, got our guy, or, it's a head coach or quarterback, got our guy. And then a year later, they move on from that guy and find another guy.
Or they move on 3 years later, like they did with Sam Darnold. I mean,
exactly.
Was the Jets guy, and he looked like the Jets guy after his rookie season. In comes Adam Gase, and Darnold's career just basically goes down the toilet. And that's why I say, so everyone's focusing on Zach Wilson. So much of it depends on the coaching and the development of the quarterback.
You're 100% right. And I always say this, like Patrick Mahomes to me would have been Patrick Mahomes no matter where he was drafted. But the fact that he was drafted by Andy Reid certainly accelerated his development at an early level. And that's how in his first year as a starter in 2018, he was able to be only the 3rd quarterback in NFL history to throw for 50 touchdown passes in a season, joining 2 of the GOATs of all time, Peyton Manning and Tom Brady on that level. That's a big part of it. But you mentioned Darnold. Darnold, of course, is now with the Carolina Panthers, and the Carolina Panthers are one of these teams that is very, 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 very interested in Deshaun Watson. Now, Deshaun Watson cleared one hurdle this week when it was learned that there would be no criminal charges levied against him. But he's still facing allegations from 22 different women about misconduct. And I know that the legal thing was a big hurdle, but there are still many, many hurdles for him to clear to be able to play on a very consistent level in the 2022 season.
Forget about the distractions for a second. I mean, is there going to be any league punishment? What is the league going to do about
That's exactly right.
Are they going to suspend them? If they suspend them, for how long? And so, it's the legal portion of it for him is over, but it's still far from over as far as the entire story is concerned. And you wonder how this will weigh on him moving forward.
You're exactly right, Tony. And I think we need to be clear about this. There was when Ben Roethlisberger had his allegations with one woman and there were no criminal charges, he was suspended 6 games and was reduced to 4. When Ezekiel Elliott had his allegations with one woman and there were no criminal charges, he was also suspended for 6 games. And I think that one was also reduced to 4. We're talking about 22 different women who have made allegations against Deshaun Watson. With the things that are going on in the NFL right now, specifically with what's going on with the Washington Commanders and the ownership there under Daniel Snyder and the massive allegations of misconduct against them, to me, there's no way this won't be a massive suspension by the league. And quite frankly, it may be reduced upon appeal, but I would be shocked, Tony, if we're not talking about a double-digit game suspension for Deshaun Watson in 2022.
And when does the league make the decision? I mean, when does they'll make the announcement? Because that can have an impact on what teams give up or what teams. All these teams want him But how much do you want him if he's going to be suspended for 8, 10, 12 games, even 6 games? I mean, if you are the Carolina Panthers, Matt Rule's got to win right away. What are you going to give away for a guy who can't play for maybe the first half of the season? Going to be interesting. Yeah. I think there's a lot of pressure on Goodell to make a decision sooner rather than later. I don't know that that's going to happen, though.
By the way, I love the chat. Pro Football Network. Do we think Trey likes Mahomes? Yes. Who wouldn't like Mahomes? Let me just reiterate. Okay, so people like Patrick Mahomes makes people stupid. He does. He just makes people stupid. Like, for people, say whatever you want. Here is his first 4 full seasons as a starter, because he only played 1 year as rookie year, 1 game as rookie year. Started the last game of the year against the Denver Broncos. He's won 4 straight AFC West championships. He's hosted 4 straight AFC championship games. He's been in a Super Bowl, been to 2 Super Bowls, won an MVP, threw 50 touchdown passes, has the most passing yards, the most passing touchdowns of any quarterback in NFL history in his first 4 full seasons as a starter. And, oh, by the way, he's also 21-3 in the division and has never lost a road division game against the AFC West. He's 13-0. I don't understand why people don't understand this basic concept of how good Patrick Mahomes is, but that's a discussion for another day. As for Deshaun Watson, one of the teams he's beaten in the postseason, when they were down 24-0, by the way, and found a way to come back to win the year they went on to win the Super Bowl. We're here in Carolina, as you mentioned. We're hearing suddenly Atlanta, and now Cleveland and New Orleans are also into this. Where are you leaning at this point about who might make the best offer for Deshaun Watson?
Listen, a year ago, before all the allegations hit the fan, we kept talking about Carolina being the favorite because the owner in Carolina, David Tepper, wants Deshaun Watson. David Tepper has been front and center in all these meetings and the negotiations with Deshaun Watson. So I think David Tepper is a guy who's going to really put pressure on Scott Fitterer and that front office to make a massive, bold move to bring in Deshaun Watson. And it's been known for the longest time that Deshaun Watson would like to play in Carolina. He had a lot of success there when he was at Clemson. So it seems like a perfect match. But all of a sudden now, in come the Cleveland Browns. Yeah. And I am told that, like Tepper in Carolina, the whole Deshaun Watson to Cleveland idea is being pushed by Jimmy Haslam. It's not the front office. It's Haslam that wants to see if he can get Deshaun Watson to Cleveland. Will Deshaun Watson go to Cleveland? I think Cleveland's biggest selling point right now is the fact that of all the teams that are in the sweepstakes, whether it be the Panthers, whether it be the Saints, the Atlanta Falcons, they're the most they are the most ready to win. They are the team that are on the cusp that Deshaun Watson can get them over the hump, get them into the playoffs, get them deep into the playoffs. That is the big selling point as opposed to New Orleans and especially Carolina. So with the Browns, from what I'm told, this is Haslam pushing this to basically try and see if they can bring Deshaun Watson in and get rid of Baker Mayfield.
Yeah, well, the Baker Mayfield, listen, that's a whole nother discussion, right? We're talking Baker going into his 5th year. They picked up the 5th-year option. They still haven't made a long-term contract extension to him. Baker was the number 1 overall pick in 2018, and here we have the potential of Deshaun Watson replacing him in Cleveland. The problem, if I'm Deshaun Watson, though, if I'm being honest about it, if I'm Deshaun Watson, and you look at the AFC North, where we have Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals, who just made it to the Super Bowl and came within a whisper of winning that game against the Rams. You have Lamar Jackson, a former MVP in the league in Baltimore, and you have to believe Baltimore is going to be better this year. Think about all the injuries that they suffered through before the season even got here. They were ravaged by injuries, especially at the running back position, which is how they like to run a lot of that offense. So you figure the Ravens with Lamar are going to be better. You figure Joe Burrow and company is still going to be pretty good. Like the AFC North, I'm not sure you want to walk into that situation if you're Deshaun Watson when you have other options that might be a path of least resistance.
Yeah, and there's also got some pretty good defenses in that AFC North.
Yeah.
The AFC South. What I'm told is this is Watson may not want to get into a situation with Carolina where he's basically starting all over again, as the situation was at Houston towards the end there. It may be a situation where he doesn't want to go through kind of a rebuild where it's a plug-and-play situation with Cleveland. I agree with what you're saying, especially from the defensive front. But the guy's a competitor, and he's probably going to have the easiest path, or at least the quickest path, if not the easiest path. That's the wrong word, wrong terminology on my part. The quickest path with the Cleveland Browns, who were very competitive last year with Baker Mayfield that was injured at the second half of the year.
Yeah, and then of course they pick up Amari Cooper for basically a role of athletic tape and a tackling dummy because the Cowboys have messed up their cap structure completely based on one contract, which of course would be the Ezekiel Elliott contract. That thing was the Hindenburg the moment they signed that thing for Dallas. When you're paying a running back that kind of dollars before you pay your quarterback, and now Ezekiel Elliott is a part-time player for the Dallas Cowboys. Look, I'm happy for Zeke that he got the money, but when you're now splitting time with Tony Pollard, there's no way you can justify paying that kind of salary to Ezekiel Elliott if it's going to cost you Amari Cooper. Like, I understand that they want to try and get Michael Gallup and they want to try and put the franchise tag on Dalton Schultz, the tight end, which they did. But are you telling me from a football perspective, you're a better team by letting Amari Cooper go and re-signing Michael Gallup to something in the neighborhood of $70 million, even though we know that's not the real number based on the first couple of years of the contract, and franchise tagging Dalton Schultz? When Michael Gallup was healthy, he wasn't the route runner or the receiver that Amari Cooper is. The Browns are the beneficiary of that because basically the Cowboys had to give him away to avoid salary cap hell based on the $20 million that Amari Cooper was making.
And they're also going to have to give away Lael Collins, who was one of the better blockers.
Yeah.
It was what Zeke's blockers. I mean, they're desperately trying to get anything for Lael Collins because if they don't, you're just going to cut him because of the fact that they can't hold on to his salary.
And the Cowboys are continuing to sort of hemorrhage players, and one of them pulled the old okey doke on him today, and that was Randy Gregory. The Cowboys announced we've reached a deal with Randy Gregory that could be up to worth $70 million, but apparently there was some language in the contract that Randy Gregory didn't like, and look who swoops in, the Denver Broncos, and they now signed Randy Gregory as an edge rusher to a deal, basically the same numbers, just different language. But I'm curious, Tony, because this past year, Randy Gregory had the most starts in his career, 11 games out of a 17-game season. And he put up decent numbers. But Randy Gregory has had himself some issues over his career since being drafted out of Nebraska. I believe it was in the second round a few years back to the Dallas Cowboys. How much can you actually trust Randy Gregory in light of everything that's happened in his career?
Well, George Payton and the Denver Broncos obviously believe that you can trust him a whole heck of a lot. But I agree with you. I mean, regardless of whether it was the first contract offered by the Dallas Cowboys or the ultimate one that he accepted by the Denver Broncos, that's a lot of money for a guy who, has not been all that dependable for issues that are well documented going back to his college days. You hope it's for the best because he's not a bad guy. But yeah, that's a lot of money. But again, as you say along, it's a passing league. You stop the passing by either rushing the passer or covering the pass. And Randy Gregory, going back to his college days, has shown himself to be an explosive pass rusher. I'm sure that's what Denver's hoping they're going to get on a week in, week out basis. But there's going to be no guarantees.
So what does that do to the idea of Von Miller going back to Denver, right? Because he's put that out there in pretty much no uncertain terms with his Instagram account after having won a Super Bowl with the Rams when they picked him up in midseason a year ago, that he's thought about going back. Can Denver afford to bring Von Miller back now?
I can't see it. I don't see that happen. They've got some other players there. The other thing that Randy Gregory did was he basically increased the market for the other pass rushers because
absolutely.
Frank Clark renegotiated his deal with the Kansas City Chiefs when everyone thought the Chiefs were going to let him go. That deal wasn't that rich as far as money's concerned. Everyone thought it was going to be a bad group, a bad pass rushing bad situation with pass rushers. Now all of a sudden, Randy Gregory elevates that with that massive contract, and now the other pass rushers now they're okay with it because they're going to be able to pick some fruit off the tree because those contracts have gone up thanks to Randy Gregory and his agent.
Yeah, much in the same way that sort of the Christian Kirk deal shook up what's going on with wide receivers, and Devontae Adams was like, wait, he's getting how much? So what am I worth? But let's stick with the AFC West for a second because I think we're finding something very interesting here. You mentioned Randy Gregory going to Denver. They also get Russell Wilson. Yep. You see the Chargers go out and make the trade for Khalil Mack, then sign J.C. Jackson, the corner out of New England, who's been remarkable for them, automatically becomes their best cover corner. And he and Derwin James, when they were kids, played football together in Florida. So there's a lot of history between those two. This is all spurred to me by one man, and that's Patrick Mahomes. And I alluded to it earlier. We're talking about a team that since he became the starter has had the run of the AFC West. Again, never lost a road division game, 13-0, 21-3 with Patrick Mahomes under center in the division, 4 straight crowns with him, actually 5 straight going back to the last year with Alex Smith, and then again hosting 4 straight AFC championship games. Literally, Tony, every move made in the AFC West has been to try and find a way to stop the absolute brilliance we've seen out of Mahomes since he became the full-time starter.
Either stop him or bring in a quarterback that can kind of compete with him, whether it's with Justin Herbert, as you mentioned, the trade with the Denver to bring Russell Wilson to the Denver Broncos. You got a decent quarterback there with the Raiders, who I thought had a great second half of the season.
Absolutely.
And, again, you're going to try. You've got to compete. You compete by either trying to stop Patrick Mahomes or trying to go toe for toe with him with a quarterback that can put the ball in the air. And I think you've seen that throughout that division.
And the interesting thing here is it looks like they've moved on Kansas City as retired Matthew, and he might have been the greatest free agent signing in the history of the Kansas City Chiefs with what he brought there over his last 3 years. They bring in Justin Reed. I really like that move. And you mentioned Clark redoing that contract. I really, really, really like that move. But it does, because of what you said about Randy Gregory, it opens up the potential now for either Chandler Jones, who I'm still shocked hasn't been signed, or even Von Miller to now go to Kansas City based on the move that Randy Gregory has gone to Denver, thus pricing them sort of out of the market.
It's interesting. I don't know that Kansas City is going to spend that much money on an edge rusher. They want to renegotiate. They want to extend the contract of Tyreek Hill. We reported that at the Combine. They also want to bring in another veteran receiver. Patrick Mahomes wants another veteran receiver. I think also Chandler Jones, when he saw the Randy Gregory contract, kind of took a step back and say, well, I can now I can ask for a little bit more since Gregory's getting all that money.
Are you surprised, though, that Chandler Jones is still out there at this point?
I am, but I think what happened was, at first it looked like it was going to be a bad market for the edge rushers, and then people, after the Gregory contract, had to go back and recalculate. And, Chandler Jones is going to sit there. You also got Zadarius Smith out there, who was cut by the Green Bay Packers.
Also someone who I'm sure the Chiefs have their radars on.
They had, as a replacement for Frank Clark. But I think Frank Clark kind of changed that whole equation, because the belief was if they cut Frank Clark, they were going to bring in Zadarius Smith. Obviously, they're going to need one with Ingram on the way out as well. You only got so much money under the cap. So, I don't know that they're going to be able to afford Chandler Jones. I don't know if they're going to be able to bring back Von Miller. They want to extend Tyreek Hill. They want to bring in a veteran receiver for Patrick Mahomes. Eventually, the well's going to run dry.
Well, the receiver thing is interesting for Kansas City. Let's talk about that for a minute before we move on to quarterbacks in the draft, because they almost got Juju Smith-Schuster a year ago. And Andy Reid obviously loves Juju. He is going to be available. The other part of this, which is interesting, is that suddenly Jarvis Landry is available. And if you have Tyreek Hill, and if you have Mecole Hardman, the Legion of Zoom, as they call it, or these speedsters down the hill, down the field, the idea of a guy like Juice Landry or Juju working underneath in the slot, that could create all kinds of problems for teams trying to defend. And I know they've re-signed Josh Gordon, and he really hasn't done anything for them. They're hoping that, I think, with a full off season under his belt, he'll find a way to sort of work his way into the system. But I do feel like one way or the other, they're going to try and land either Jarvis Landry or Juju Smith-Schuster in Kansas City.
You got another speedster there, Mecole Hardman, the kid from Georgia. But I agree with you. I mean, Landry, calming influence, a guy that's been in the league for a while, a guy who, wants to take that next step. I think that would be a perfect fit, as you mentioned.
So we'll see what happens here. Sometimes we always love the splashes in the first couple of days of free agency, but if you go back historically and look at the teams that really benefited, it's the teams that are a little slower to pull the trigger and sometimes get those second week or even third week free agents at the right price that really have more of an impact on that team they're playing for this year. So we all love the juice, and the NFL finds a way with Tom Brady announcing his return, by the way, in the middle of Selection Sunday, The NFL always finds a way to dominate the headlines, but I do think that sometimes the teams that take a little bit of a slower approach in free agency sometimes wind up a little bit better. Okay,
And
we got a few more. Yeah, go ahead, Tony.
They don't get themselves into salary cap hell down the road either, because the guys who are usually getting better contracts. One last thing I want to mention. I want to go back to the Cleveland Deshaun Watson story. What happens to Baker Mayfield if Deshaun Watson ends up in Cleveland, even the small chance that happens? I found out tonight that Andrew Berry, the general manager of the Cleveland Browns, has reached out to Baker Mayfield's people and said, listen, we will work with you to find a place where Baker wants to be. And if Deshaun Watson does end up in Cleveland, I'm told that Baker Mayfield's choice of teams would be the Indianapolis Colts. Because, again, when you look at the other teams that need quarterbacks, Carolina, Seattle, Indianapolis, good offensive line, outstanding running back, a team that is on the cusp of winning, a team that has won and just missed out on the playoffs last year. If that trade goes down, Baker Mayfield's number one choice to be traded would be to the Indianapolis Colts.
Okay, see, that's fascinating to me because I'm not sure, if we're being honest about it, how much of an upgrade he is over Carson Wentz. Like, to me, the perfect quarterback for Indy would be Jimmy Garoppolo. You look at the situation there, good offensive line, great running game, great defense. Sounds very familiar to how the Niners won a lot of games with Jimmy Garoppolo as their starting quarterback. Again,
I didn't say the Colts wanted him. I said Baker Mayfield's choice would be to go to the Indianapolis Colts. But again, this all hinges on Deshaun Watson ending up in Cleveland, which I think is a long shot.
Yeah, it is fascinating, though. I mean, Baker Mayfield was the number one overall pick in 2018, and look what we've seen happen in that short time frame since he was the number one overall pick when the draft was held in Dallas. All right, let's talk about quarterbacks in the draft. Look, we had 5 go in the first round last year. That's not going to happen this year. We could have 2, potentially 3 go in the first round of the draft. Let's go through some of these guys because it is going to be, as always, a quarterback-driven league. What are you hearing about Matt Corral out of Ole Miss and how much of the injury that he suffered in the Sugar Bowl may or may not affect his draft status?
Not going to affect his draft stock. I mean, a terrific player, a real leader, a tough guy, played while injured. Remember, you saw the ankle injury during the bowl game. He actually injured that ankle earlier in the season. Makes all the passes, gets it between the ears. I think the concern with Corral is plays in that Lane Kiffin system. How long is it going to take him to absorb and transition to an NFL system where he's got a tight end lined up tight, where he's got to make a bunch of different reads? I like Corral, and I think he could be a real good starter 2 years down the road. I think he's got a great amount of upside, but again, it's going to need proper coaching.
Yeah, and the other thing, those 2 interceptions, those 2 games, he had 11 of his 14 interceptions in 2020 came against 2 teams. He threw 6 against Arkansas, 5 against LSU. What are his limitations that concern you?
He doesn't have great stature. I mean, he's a guy that needs a clean pocket to work from. On the design quarterback runs at Mississippi, he ran tough. He ran hard on the inside. He's not going to be able to do that on Sunday. So you're going to have a good offensive line. You need a good offensive line around, so he needs a clean pocket so he can see the field. I also think while he's got a solid deep arm, needs to improve his deep accuracy because he left some receivers hanging to dry out there. Underthrowing passes, just a matter of working on the mechanics to get the ball downfield accurately.
By the way, if Corral does sneak into the first round, he would be the first Ole Miss quarterback without the last name Manning to go in the first round. Archie and Eli, of course, went before him. And then there's hand size guy, Kenny Pickett, right? Like that's the thing with Kenny Pickett. And he had an okay first few years at Pittsburgh and then exploded onto the scene. But the hand size thing, I don't care about it. But what history tells us, Tony, is that the people that evaluate the quarterback position care about it. At 8.5-inch hand size, he's tied for the 3rd smallest hand size ever measured at the combine since at least 2003. That's how far back the data takes us. And we can also tell you that no quarterback has ever been drafted going back to at least 2003 in the first round with a hand size smaller than 9. Joe Burrow, a couple of years ago, had his hand size measured at 9 and sort of said, well, there I am. I got to retire early because of my tiny hands. And that has worked out okay for him. But how significant is that? Because he did play in a bad weather stadium or bad weather city in Pittsburgh. It's not like he was a climate-controlled quarterback. But all the data tells us that a guy with hands that small will not be drafted in the first round.
Played in a bad weather city using a college football, not an NFL
Correct.
football. Okay.
Yep.
And if you were at Senior Bowl practices, as 5 of us from Pro Football Network were, when you were there Wednesday, when it was a downpour and it was chilly, you could tell that the ball was coming out of his hand funny. You could tell that he was struggling gripping the ball. So, they're going to go back and look at that film. What's going to happen is when these teams bring him for the official 30 visits, they're going to put the ball in his hand and they're going to try and swat it out and see if he can hold on to the ball, how easy it is to swat the ball out, because it's not only just the way the ball comes out of your hand in bad weather. It's the ability when you're scrambling around to hold on to that ball, to protect the football. I also think that, and I agree with it, Pickett has tremendous senior campaign. And I always like getting quarterbacks when they're on the upswing. Just don't know that he's a great vertical passer. Very good in the underneath stuff, very good with the timing. Don't think he's a guy that can get the ball downfield like some of the other quarterbacks on a consistent basis and do it accurately. So you got a guy who's not a big arm quarterback with small hands, because as you mentioned, 9 inches is the demarcation line for a lot of teams. So there are some questions. Is this guy a game manager, or is he going to be our franchise type of signal caller? I like Kenny Pickett, but I'm leaning more towards game manager.
Yeah, and again, we're not saying that the hand size is the line of demarcation. All we're doing is telling you the data tells us from the people that evaluate this, they believe the hand size is the line of demarcation. 9 inches, that we've never had any quarterback taken in the first round with hand size that was measured less than 9 inches. Maybe the most interesting quarterback in this year's draft is Malik Willis, the kid out of Liberty who transferred from Auburn. Look, there are a lot of things to really like about him. Obviously, the level of competition coming from Auburn to Liberty is going to give some people pause. But, Tony, I'm not sure if he's the guy who has the high – he may be the guy that has the highest ceiling of all the guys in this draft at the quarterback position that we're talking about.
Not even close. I mean, he has the highest upside, but he's also, of the top quarterbacks, probably the least NFL ready. He is the guy that's going to need the most hand-holding. He's the guy that's going to need the most coaching. Malik Willis is the type of quarterback where, regardless of whether you watch him on film, you watch him at Senior Bowl practices, he would make some jaw-dropping throws. And then he would make some head-scratching passes, and you wondered what the heck was going on, especially when he was trying to drop back from underneath center as opposed to consistently taking the snaps out of a shotgun alignment. So, yeah, there's no doubt about it. Malik Willis has the highest upside, but he also is going to need a lot of work. My concern with Malik Willis is team drafts him in the middle part of round 1 and tries to start him from week 1. I think this is a situation with Malik Willis that you have to mimic what Kansas City did with Pat Mahomes. Sit him down for a year. And that was, as we reported from the Combine, that's the hopes of the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's why they went out and got Mitch Trubisky, signed him for 2 years, because they can then maybe, hopefully, or they would like to draft a guy like Malik Willis, sit him for a year, let him observe, help develop his game, and then hopefully by year 2, he's ready to start.
Big Mitch energy in Pittsburgh. I got to say, I love this move for the Steelers. Everybody I've talked to, Tony, real quickly, before we move on to the last 2 quarterbacks in this draft that we're going to talk about tonight, I've heard from the end of September, early October of last football season, how much everybody in Buffalo loved Mitch Trubisky. And sometimes you just need a second chance. Like Carson Wentz is on his third and potentially last chance as a starting quarterback in the NFL. But everybody that was around Mitch in Buffalo raved about the way he played, the way he practiced, the way he worked with his teammates. Remember, this was a kid when he was taken second overall in the 2017 draft, had only started 13 games in his collegiate career. It's not his fault that he was drafted ahead of Mahomes and Deshaun Watson. That's the Bears' fault. Yet he had to bear the brunt of that. And some of the things that went wrong in Chicago with Mitch were absolutely on him, but a lot of them were not. And I think the idea of Mitch getting a fresh start somewhere, especially in a city like Pittsburgh, I think could really work in his favor.
A fresh start after sitting for a year behind Josh Allen and going through that experience. I mean, go back to what I said about Malik Willis. My concern is they put him in a starting lineup too soon. They try and start him from week 1. That was part of the problem with Mitch Trubisky. They threw him into the lineup too soon rather than just being patient with him. And, patience and quarterbacks are words that don't go together these days in the NFL, but the smart teams are patient. And I think that I agree with you. I mean, Trubisky's got a great amount of upside. I think the year sitting behind Josh Allen and just watching and observing, I think that's going to bode very well for him. That's why he was such a hot commodity once free agency opened. We reported on it from the Combine about how people were absolutely – Mitch Trubisky was talked about more at the Combine than the Combine quarterbacks were.
Yeah, so listen, it may not work out, but I do feel like he's going to surprise some people with the way he's going to play. And for these ideas that he's going to have a competition with Mason Rudolph, stop it, okay? If you believed it all in Mason Rudolph, you wouldn't bring in Mitchell Trubisky. It's just the way it is. You know what Mason Rudolph is, and more importantly, you know what he isn't in Pittsburgh. And that's why Mitchell Trubisky, that is his job to lose the entire way in Pittsburgh. All right, before we wrap up this show, the first of all of our Draft Insider shows leading up to the draft in Vegas, let me get your thoughts on the last two quarterbacks we want to talk about tonight, Desmond Ridder and Sam Howell.
Ritter's a winner. He's got great physical skills. He protects the ball. He gets it going between the ears. Accuracy is an issue. And I'm not talking about statistical accuracy. I'm talking about pass placement. Doesn't lead his receivers all that well. Doesn't throw his receivers free, a term that's used all the time now. Sometimes misses wide open receivers. He's got to work on his mechanics, but he's got starting ability. Sam Howell, off the 2020 film, you figure he's going to be a top 15 pick. Did not play all that well in 2021. A good vertical passer and showed a lot of flashes in 2021. When you really got into the film, it wasn't as bad as it seemed at face value. Problem is he's a small guy. He doesn't have great stature. I think he's got scheme limitations. But in the right system, I do believe Sam Howell can start on Sunday.
All right, we'll see what happens there. And again, we'll do a much deeper dive on all these quarterbacks as we get closer and closer to the draft. Tony, always great to be back with you, my friend. This is the first of our weekly shows leading up to the draft in Vegas. I cannot wait to chop it up with you every week. And I'm looking forward to this because the draft, as we say, is the ultimate reality TV show. It's the only thing where none of us know what actually is going to happen. Like if you could have bet that Laramie Tunsil would get drafted and then video of him smoking weed out of a bong in a gas mask, you would have made a lot of money. But nobody knew that was coming. That's the beauty of the draft. They throw you curves all the time. All right, my friend, good to talk to you. We'll catch up next week, okay?
Thanks.